And welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today we're going to talk about Catherine de' Medici.
One day we will be remembered.
But now they're home, and he's 14, and he's been home for a few years now. The same emperor that had him held hostage for 4 years is the same emperor that held Catherine under siege as a child, and he was trying to save her, but both of them had traumatic childhoods, and you could say both kind of from the same guy.
Mm-hmm.
He was a busy guy, and likely they bonded over their traumatic childhoods. They were like, oh yeah, that guy, he's problematic. Even when he's helping, he's problematic. He burned all our food.
I was kidnapped too.
Right? Like, relatable. So their wedding was huge. It was a spectacle. They were like, this was a royal wedding. Henry danced and jousted for Catherine, and there were gifts on gifts on gifts on gifts. The 14-year-olds were almost 15, and they were married. And that's when it gets a little awkward, because Henry was escorted to his marriage bed by his father, Francois I, King of France, who then waited to watch them consummate their marriage.
Semi-normal then, but still, wait.
Yeah, it was totally normal, but how awkward. You're 14, you're gonna have sex for the first time, and your dad is just watching.
I mean,
And later
first time for him.
Later he commented on it, saying that each had shown valor in the joust. So, ew, he's a little creepy. Imagine you're Catherine. This is your father-in-law, who you just recently met.
Take the joust, lady.
And the next morning, her uncle, the Pope, came into their room to bless the previous night's proceedings.
Ooh.
So at least he didn't watch, but like the next morning he's in and he's like, okay, let's bless this, because I know what you did last night. It's just so awkward.
The better relative is the one that didn't watch.
Right? So gross. I can't even imagine. I don't know how one does the joust with a crowd of people watching.
Very quickly.
Hopefully. But just 11 months after they got married, her Uncle Pope died.
Oh.
And her dowry hadn't been fully paid. And the new Pope wasn't a Medici, so he didn't have to honor that contract. So they only got like half of her dowry, which honestly was the biggest appeal to her being married into the French royal family. They wanted the money. So King Francis is said to have gotten very angry and remarked about Catherine, "The girl has come to me stark naked," meaning she's going to cost me more than she's giving me because I didn't even get that sweet, sweet dowry. And Catherine was very charming, apparently. And she told the king, like, I understand that you might not want me, and I get why you would want to replace me. And if you have to replace me, you should definitely replace me. But it's been lovely while I've been here. I've loved having this family, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. And I'm just honored to have been nominated. And she was so charming that the king was like, oh, no, I'm not going to send you back. God wants you to be married to my son, so do I. So he went from girls come to me stark naked to, oh, of course we're not going to get rid of you. So she was charming. Yeah, she was charming. She was a 14-year-old who knew how to talk the king into changing his mind. Prince Henri took little interest in his young wife. They were friends. He was kind to her. They hung out, chatted. But he had a mistress who he was in love with.
A 14-year-old had a mistress?
He did. And he might have had this mistress since he was 12.
Oh.
And he was in love with this mistress. This mistress is Diane de Poitiers. Diane had been married at 15 to a 54-year-old count.
Ew.
She was married 16 years and then widowed at the age of 31 because by then her husband was 70. And her husband died 2 years before their wedding. So when she was 31 and her 70-year-old husband died, Prince Henri was 12. And sometime between when he was 12 and 14, that's when the relationship started. And she would have been between 31 and 33 at the time.
Oh.
She was kind of like a mother figure. She had been lady in waiting to his mother. And she had literally, almost for sure, been there helping in his birth.
Like the original Mrs. Robbins.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gross.
Yeah, and it was a whole thing. His mom had died, and so they sent Diane de Poitiers off with the boys when they did the exchange. So she was the one that kind of was like, goodbye, you know, like that's who got the goodbye hugs. And apparently he just sat in hostage mode for 4 years thinking about this beautiful, beautiful woman. And when he got back, the 30-something Diane and the teenage Prince started a relationship, and he was crazy in love. And Catherine did not become pregnant.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. About 3 years into their marriage, things changed. Henry's older brother, the heir, Dauphin, Francois, played a game of tennis, drank some water, collapsed, and died several days later. Meaning Henri was no longer the spare, he was now the heir, with his older brother dead. And Catherine went from Duchess of Orleans to the Dauphine of France, which is the term for the future queen. It's the Dauphine of France is like the Princess of Wales in England. It's the title you get when you're next up to be queen. An investigation into the death of the prince was commissioned, and a lot of rumors of poison were all over the place, because they're like, he played tennis, drank some water, collapsed, then died. So people were like, who poisoned him? That's weird. Although, he might have had tuberculosis. So there could be that. Maybe don't play tennis if you're having tuberculosis flare up.
That's not like a fast death, though.
Yeah, it's not. So
I lived in a third world country with tuberculosis. It's not that bad.
Yeah, you don't have that Valois immune system though. The Valois immune system was pretty weak.
That's true. I got a stellar immune system.
Exactly. You are like the Catherine de Medici of life.
When we were all together and y'all got sick, I was like, I'm not going to get sick. Y'all called me a liar.
You
and who didn't get sick?
Didn't get sick. Yep. You do not have a Valois immune system. The Valois men at this time, specifically the men, but some of the girls too, the Valois at this time were known for kind of poor immune systems. They had weak constitutions. If tuberculosis was going around, they were picking it up.
Probably from inbreeding, in all honesty.
Probably, yes. And they had just gotten past the Valois era where they were all going a little bit mad. So they were like, oh, we can deal with weak immune systems. Like, we're not all mad, so let's just take the weak immune system. They were repairing their damaged genes at this point. But they weren't there yet. Some of the suspected poisoners of the Dauphin were the Holy Roman Emperor, the guy who held them hostage for 4 years, and Catherine, who was in France, but she was still seen as being Italian, and Italians were kind of seen by the French at that point as being sneaky, tricky, conniving, kill you for any kind of reason, especially if they weren't noble, they were just wealthy. It was looked at like, well, how'd you get so rich? Like, not by being an honest person. Probably by poisoning. But Catherine was still only 17, and she'd lived in France for 3 years. So I feel like it's unlikely, but a lot of people thought it was her, because also she had the most to gain, her and her husband. Like, now they were the next king and queen of France.
I mean, fair.
And they ended up executing the prince's, one of his employees, who also happened to be Italian, so that didn't look good for her. They were like, oh, the Italians probably teamed up and did it, because he was the one that handed the prince the water. So, like, must have been him, so he got executed. The following year, Prince Henri was off to battle. He was now going to be the next king, because he was no longer the spare, and he needed some battle experience to kind of be like, look, I could be a good king. He needed to prove himself. Catherine was now 18. She'd been married 4 years, and she was still not pregnant. And people were starting to be concerned, like, is there a medical problem? Like, 4 years is a long time, especially since her parents had her after 10 months of marriage. And as the next queen, now it was even more important that she have a baby. Like, it was one thing for the Duchess not to have a baby, but she's going to be the queen. So in order to continue their family line, she needs to have a baby.
At least 2.
Yes, hopefully two. At least one, but preferably more than that. Way more than that. And she was just kind of seen as the common Italian girl whose dowry didn't get fully paid and didn't have any children. So she could pretty easily be put aside. They could just be like, look, her dowry didn't get paid. We're sending her back. Look, we didn't get paid for this.
And they're not getting an heir.
Exactly. When Henri returned from battle, he came home from battle with a baby. He had had a brief affair with a different Italian girl that resulted in pregnancy. And he brought the baby home with him from war. So, like, if you watch Game of Thrones, it's a very Jon Snow situation. Like,
I was going to say it was a Jon Snow situation.
Yep, it's a Jon Snow situation. He showed up and he's like, look, I got a baby. Right? Yes. Although there's a whole backstory on that, but but yeah.
So your husband went off to war. You're like, I don't know, a year or two. You're like, oh, I miss him so much. And then he comes home. It's like, by the way,
I have a baby and I brought it back to court with me. And he brought it back as proof that it wasn't his fault. Like, look, I can have a baby.
He can have a baby. Oh.
My wife is the problem. And if it's not awkward enough, he named the baby Diane after his mistress.
Ew.
So she's Diane of France, named after his mistress, Diane de Poitiers. And his mistress raised this baby, so it was like their baby together, kind of. Even though it was really with this Italian girl. Yeah. And he was like, look, I can have kids. I just had one. And she's a girl, and she may be illegitimate, but he recognized her. He's like, she's a royal child. She's just not legitimate. She can't be queen. She could probably be a duchess.
She had two things going against her. She was illegitimate and a girl.
Yeah, but good times for Catherine, I'm sure. She was like, whew, at least we know he can have kids.
Horrible.
So Henri was a fertile myrtle with a baby he brought back to court with him. And as the years went on, Catherine stayed not pregnant. And her new husband and her father-in-law were getting increasing pressure from everyone, all their advisors, to replace Catherine. Like, she is the problem. She's a dud. She wasn't paid for. And she's not having babies. Like, we need to replace her because we need a baby king. But Henri did have younger brothers, so it wouldn't be the full end of the family line. Because he had a little brother, Charles, and he was his father's favorite because he was the one that wasn't raised in Spain. But again, whose fault was that? Francois?
Francois's fault.
Exactly. Part of me thinks that the reason he didn't set Catherine aside was because he was hoping they wouldn't have children, and then his favorite son would just get to be king. But that's just a Christina's conspiracy theory, but it seems very on brand for Francois the First.
I mean, it seems legit.
Yeah. So at this point, it's been a number of years, nearly a decade, and they decide that the royal couple needs to be examined by the royal doctors. Like, maybe there's a problem that we just don't know about. And the royal doctors examined both of them and said, yes, the royal couple does have a medical problem. But by royal couple, they meant him. And by problem, they meant that his penis was slightly bent downward. It was crooked. And potentially because of that, he may or may not have had an oddly placed seminal opening.
Get a gonzo nose.
Yeah, he did. And the solution, they were like, look, you can still have babies. Obviously, he had a baby with this other Italian girl. So you can do that. But what you're going to need to do, and I'm so sorry, for lack of a better term, they would have to utilize doggy style. Like, this was in the official paperwork that the prince had a crooked dick and they were prescribed by their doctor doggy style. That would get them a baby. And remember, he had a baby with that other Italian girl, so I guess we know how they were doing it, or else Henry just kept his mouth shut.
Did they ask the mistress?
They didn't. They just assumed that must have been what he was doing. And if it wasn't what he was doing, he kept his mouth shut. He wasn't like, well, look, I did it this way and I had a baby. So I guess we just can assume that was his preferred style.
Sideways works better. Saying for a friend. I'm not saying
exactly. Exactly. And they were like, you have to use doggy style. That's how you get babies. And he kept his mouth shut. He was just like, yeah, that tracks. I agree. In desperation, Catherine tried every known trick of the time to get pregnant. She was working on all her fertility things, such as placing cow dung mixed with ground stag's antlers on her source of life, so her hoo-ha,
Ooh,
and drinking mule's urine.
maybe that's why she wasn't getting pregnant.
Yeah, that's what we call fertility treatment in the 16th century.
A poop on her for jazz.
Mm-hmm. And drinking the mule's urine, don't forget that. That's a very important
I
part.
mean, I'd rather drink mule urine than put poop on my vagina.
Yeah. I think she's just lucky she didn't get some sort of real bad infection.
Yeah.
One of the other things she tried to do when she was trying to get pregnant was her quarters were right underneath her husband's, and there was a secret passageway that linked their quarters. She had people drill like a peephole into his quarters so that she could watch him with Diane to see if maybe she was doing something wrong.
Who's into a little voyeurism, maybe.
Yeah, and unfortunately it didn't work because when she went there and saw her husband with Diane, her eyes were apparently so full of tears that she didn't really pick anything up.
Oh.
I know, it's really sad. And she noticed that the way her husband was with Diane was very different than the way he was with her. With her, it was more of a chore, like this is something I have to do because we need an heir. And him and Diane seemed to be really in love. But again, he was very young. This is very uncomfortable for me to describe this like a relationship. It didn't work. It just broke her heart, basically, because she was in love. And she was like, oh, that might be the problem. He's not in love with me. He's in love with Diane. And he's older now. He's 24. Diane is now in her 40s. So at this point, I suppose it was consensual. I'm very uncomfortable with the way this relationship started out. But 10 years into their marriage, when she was 24, she got pregnant.
Oh.
So I don't know if it was the dung or the mule urine or the doggy style, or some people have suggested she just went through puberty really late.
Oh, that could be.
Some people are like, her body just wasn't, she was very small, very thin, very tiny, petite. They're like, maybe she just couldn't get pregnant until she was real fully grown.
Under a lot of stress.
Yeah. You're had a stressful childhood. You're worried you're going to be sent back to Italy where they hate you. Like, just there was a lot going on. Your husband has a mistress and a baby with a totally different person named after that mistress. There's a lot going on for this teenager. On the 19th of January, 1544, she gave birth to her first child, a son, that they named Francois, after his grandfather, King Francois I, the father-in-law that Catherine was very fond of.
Mm-hmm.
Henry, not so much. He had a bit of a strained relationship with his father because of that whole hostage thing and then the whole I don't trust you, you're too Spanish thing. They named this baby Francois after him. And just 15 months later, she had another baby, Princess Elizabeth. Because when it rains, it pours for Catherine. And she proceeded to have a baby every 15 to 18 months or so. She was always pregnant. Normal, but... She would have a baby, she'd be pregnant 4 to 9 months later.
You know what, though? Okay, I don't care if you include this in it. They did tell me, so when I started going through fertility treatments, they did tell me you might just need to get your body pregnant once.
Yeah.
And then it'll figure it out and just get pregnant on its own. So it's an actual thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she did. She was then almost constantly pregnant. She had a 4 to 9 month break in between having a baby and getting pregnant again.
I mean, maybe they were doing it wrong.
I mean, maybe the doggy style really did help. Or maybe she was like, wait, that's where you're supposed to stick it? That's not what you're doing with me.
I was thinking, like, maybe he was putting it in the wrong spot.
Maybe. I mean yeah,
like poop, so.
her heart got broken, but then she's like, oh, I see the problem.
Like, oh.
We're not doing that at all. So after Princess Elizabeth, they had Princess Claude. And while Catherine was pregnant with her...
Sorry.
Yes?
Claude, a girl?
Yes. Claude used to be a girl's name. At the time, it was a girl's name. But it was also kind of a boy's name. This is kind of when it started going from girl to boy. So Princess Claude. Or in 16th century France, Claude was technically a girl's name. So Princess Claude.
Gross.
And while Catherine was pregnant with her fourth baby, things changed again. Her father-in-law died. And this made her husband the new king.
Oh.
So she's pregnant with baby number 4, and she is the Queen of France.
Get it, girl.
And it was right around this time that a deal was made to betroth her oldest, who was at this point 3.5, because she's having babies fast, to the 5-year-old Mary, Queen of Scots. Because Scotland was having some Civil War issues, and Mary, Queen of Scots was a little baby 5-year-old Queen of Scotland, and she wasn't safe.
Is that Bloody Mary?
No.
Okay.
Bloody Mary is Queen Mary the First of England.
Right.
Although they are contemporaries. Mary, Queen of Scots is slightly younger than Bloody Mary by maybe 20 years. So 5-year-old Mary, Queen of Scots, she is going to live in France because Scotland's not safe. And back then they were kind of like, oh yeah, well, if our kids are getting married, then we want to raise her to be like a good spouse to our child. So they were kind of being raised like siblings. That could backfire, or they could just be close. Like from day one, you know that's who you're getting married to. He was 3.5, she was 5. And she moved in with Catherine and her husband, the new king. And Catherine's husband, Henri, he loved Mary, Queen of Scots. And he said things like she was the most beautiful child he had ever seen. And Catherine didn't take that well, having just recently started providing children of her own. And then her husband's like, oh, but look at this kid. She's perfect. And Catherine's like, what? But like, we have kids too. And he's like, yeah, but they don't really compare. So.
But what about our kids?
Yeah, she was like,
Poor thing.
didn't really love Mary, Queen of Scots, even though Mary, Queen of Scots is a little 5-year-old has no ability to do anything differently. And it got worse when the king decided that Mary, Queen of Scots, was going to outrank his children, including her future husband, the future King of France. Because at 5, she was already the Queen of Scotland. So she did outrank them. She was a queen of a country, of a foreign country. Her husband wouldn't outrank her until his dad was dead and he became the King of France. And then he would only outrank her in France, because in Scotland, he would be her consort. She would outrank him there.
Oh.
But Catherine didn't like that. She was like, I don't like that my kids have to walk behind this foreign child that just lives with us, who's apparently perfect. They had to walk behind her. Like, she outranked them. She walked behind the royal couple, and the royal children walked behind her.
I mean, definitely jealous.
Yes. But it does make sense. She is a queen. It wouldn't be any different than a queen of another country came over. They would outrank your children, too. This queen just happens to be a little girl. And right on schedule, they had their 4th baby, Louis, and then Charles, about 16 months later. And just 4 months after Charles was born, his brother Louis died at the age of 20 months. He had been passed around from person to person at his little brother's christening, and he got sick, and he died.
Yeah, why you don't hand kids around?
Right? The royal couple kept having babies every 15 to 18 months. I mean, it was pretty scheduled. Most of them are about 15 months apart. The longer gaps are 18 months, but that's rarer. But other than that, the relationship didn't improve. He stayed madly in love with Diane, who had a lot of say over everything. She was the person turning the king's head for everything. She was even in charge of raising the royal children. She was in charge of overseeing the royal nursery. So not only was Catherine's husband really into this woman, but she started to be a little worried that this woman would become like a second mother to her children. She's like, look, I can't compete with you for my kids. I'm already competing with you for my husband. But she was older. She was 20 years older than them. She had raised children. She knew what she was doing. And so the king was like, no, she should be in charge of, she knows how to raise kids. She's done it before. But Catherine was like, oh, I can't with this. So then the couple had another baby, Prince Henri, named after his father. And then Princess Margot, which again is a pronunciation thing. She's Princess Margot, but if she were, say, English, we would call her Princess Margaret. But in France, she's Princess Margot.
So is it spelled like the Margot we have now? That's like Margot.
It's spelled Margot, but also sometimes it's spelled Margaret. But the appropriate spelling would be Margot. Yeah, so Margot. And then they had another baby, which is pronounced Hercule, which is a fine name, except if you say it in English, Hercule is Hercules. So Prince Hercules.
Oh, I like Hercules way better than Hercule.
Hercule. And
sounds like Urkel.
Yeah. And little Prince Hercule was reportedly very tiny and frail. They said that once he was full grown, he was barely taller than the court dwarves. So he was like 4 feet tall, 4.5 maybe.
So not a Hercules.
No, the name didn't really fit. It was sort of like if you call a big guy tiny, you know?
Yeah, or Muffin.
He didn't love his name, Hercule. And then she was pregnant again at 37 because she has not stopped since she was 24. She is on her 9th pregnancy in 13 years. So
Oh,
it's going fast.
sounds exhausting.
So exhausting. And she wouldn't have known this while she was pregnant because they didn't have ultrasounds or anything like that. But it was twins. And
Ooh.
back then, you knew you had twins when they were born, and there was two of them because there was no, I mean, you might be a little bigger, but there was no real way to figure that out.
Yeah, but like after your 10th kid, like I feel like you're just a little bigger anyway.
Exactly, exactly. So she wouldn't have known it was twins. And she's 37, which is getting into the range where that's dangerous to have a baby back then at 37. 34 was the average age of death for women back then in that area. And that was because by 34, it starts to get dangerous to have babies. And she's 37.
She's already an old lady.
She is. And she's 37. She's having twins. So one of her babies, Jean, didn't survive the birth.
Jean. There's a lot of Jean's a really common name in babies.
Yeah, because of the French, right?
Yeah.
So Jean didn't survive the birth. She reportedly had died a few hours before she was born, and then she was born, not living.
I'll see ya.
And her twin, Victoire, or in English would be like Victoria, they had to break her leg
Ooh.
to save the queen's life. She wasn't being born. And they were like, look, if we break the baby's leg, we can probably save the queen. And so they did that. And Queen Catherine was reportedly like, no, absolutely not. But they're like, if we don't, you die, and so does she. So we're not going to listen to what you have to say. But she didn't want that to happen, and that involves people reaching their hands up there and infection and all kinds of stuff. And on top of that, your baby has a broken leg.
Yeah, babies have no memory. I probably didn't even remember it.
Yeah. And Victoire then died 2 months later. So the queen did survive, but neither of her twins did.
Probably the complication of the broken leg.
Probably. So the royal family was growing. Her 9th pregnancy was twins. So she had 10 children. One had died young, and then the twins didn't survive. So she still got 7 living children out of 10, which is pretty good rate for back then. That's sad, but you couldn't expect them. If they all lived, that would be shocking. But despite the royal family growing, the royal children, for the most part, were sickly and frail. They were undersized. They got sick a lot. They were delicate. And that just added more issues between the Queen Catherine, and the little queen, Mary Queen of Scots. Because she was healthy and tall and charming and intelligent. She was outshining all of Catherine's half-common children. And all those kids looked up to her. They were willing to follow her. They were like, yeah, she was the queen bee of the royal children. And of course, everyone blamed Catherine's commonness as to why so many of her children were frail and sickly. Like weak peasants. This is why we don't let peasants into the royal family, because they have weak kids. But
probably just royal breeding.
Historically, yeah, it likely was the Valois inbreeding. Mm-hmm. A Valois child was more likely to be born frail and sickly than not. More Valois children just had health issues their entire lives than were healthy. So it was almost for sure a Valois trait. They have a lot of deaths from tuberculosis. That runs in their family. And King Henri's parents were cousins. So they weren't not inbreeding. They were just trying to do it less. Diane de Poitiers never saw Catherine as a threat. Even though she was younger and newer, she was like, I don't have to worry. This guy is madly in love with me. He doesn't really care for his wife. She didn't see her as a threat so much that she would encourage her boyfriend, the king, to go impregnate his wife. She'd be like, tick-tock. Like, she's not pregnant yet. You need to go do this.
Get moving.
Yeah. And it was sort of awkward because sometimes... This is so awkward. So, a suggestion was made that Diane de Poitiers would get the king going, and he'd get almost to the point of completion, and then he'd run down to Catherine's room. Finish.
A fluffer.
And then he would go back up to his room where Diane was and do it again, because she had to claim her territory, basically.
Will be remembered.
Thanks for listening.